Right. I have to wait for Patrick to pop out and say we're live on Facebook and YouTube.
I'm actually going to say it from here. We are live, Barbara.
Oh, wonderful. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. What a pleasure it is to see so many people and new people besides. Thank you for joining us. And to our virtual audience, welcome. And if you have questions that you want to pose, please put them into the comments field and Patrick will come out and read them to us as we go on. Are you all set? Great. So here we are with Burner, the Gray Man. So some of you may have been influenced by the movie already as to what you envision the Gray Man is. How many of you have seen the Gray Man by now? Aha. I told Mark that when he had a movie, he'd find more readers. And sure enough. So you're welcome to ask questions, and Mark will use his own discretion about whether he wants to answer them about the movie. And with us tonight is Kyle Mills, who has been the author of many books, and we've been old friends for a long time, and became the Vince Flynn, Mitch Rapp guy after Vince died. So we're really happy to see him. And he lives part of the year out of the country, so we don't always get to capture him, but he was here in September. And with any luck, he will be back next September on, if I can swing it, September 9th with William Kent Kruger. But I don't know if my influence at Simon & Schuster will go to that extent.
Sure it will.
We'll find out. Anyway, I'm really pleased. If I recall right, I engineered this program in part because you had not, up until last fall, you had not had a chance to meet Mark. Do I have that right?
No,
Yeah,
VoucherCon.
Yeah, we just met.
When I introduced you
we
at
just met in Minneapolis
VoucherCon?
at a conference in September or whenever
It
that
was,
Yeah.
yeah. You've gotten to be taller. I can't hug you anymore. There's somehow you seem to.
I've got my lifts in.
No kidding. It's been wonderful. So I know that you got to read Burner because you posted a wonderful picture of yourself weeks ago. So why don't I turn this over to you and see what you have to say to Mark?
All right. I don't know if everybody knows his resume. It's kind of incredible. This was your 12th Gray Man.
Mm-hmm.
You've
Correct.
done an original audio with Armored.
Yep.
Then wrote a book about it.
Yeah.
Going to write another book about it.
Yeah.
You've done a book with Rip Rollins.
Yeah.
And you're thinking about you're going to do another one.
Yeah, we're definitely doing a sequel. Yeah.
Doing another one of
Mhm.
those. Not to mention Tom Clancy universe.
Right.
Not only writing with Tom, but for Tom
Right.
after he passed
Yeah,
away,
yeah.
and a few books that you've never published, right?
Yeah. Yeah. 4 books under a book. I don't know why we're bringing that up.
So well, because honestly, I
Really
find
not
it,
part of my resume.
I find it
It's not the
incredible.
hits.
It's incredible. I mean, you haven't even been doing this, I don't think, half as long as me. You've written way more books.
Well,
than have.
my first book came out in 2009, and I was a ghostwriter on a couple books that aren't mentioned. So Burner's my 23rd book since 2009, and I can't keep going at this pace.
Well, that was one of my questions.
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. I didn't mean to step on your question, but
No.
yeah, no, I mean, this year I'm writing 2 books. Next year I'm going to write 1 book. The year after that I might write 2 books.
So what are your two for this year?
This year is the 13th Gray Man, which I'm working on now, and the second book in the Josh Duffy series, which Armored was the first book. So
Are you planning on doing that for a long? Is that going to keep going? you
I
think?
don't know. I really don't know. And I mean, not to get too inside baseball, they actually offered me a deal to do 2 more books, and I was like, let me just agree to 1 because I got an idea for 1. I don't have an idea for 2, and I don't want to get out over my skis. So I will write it in the second half of this year, the second Armored book, and it'll be out next summer. So I'll have 2 books out next year.
Could I interpolate a question? Do I have some dim idea that Armored has been optioned for a movie or something else besides The Gray Man?
Yeah, Armored has been optioned by Sony, and the last I heard, I had a Zoom meeting with a screenwriter or maybe bringing it to television. So like as a series. So we shall see. You know, I say that, well, now that I've had a movie made, it's not 1,000,000 to 1 chance I'll have another one. It's like 1,000,000 to 2 chance I have another one. It's still like an incredible long shot, and it never won't be, but yeah.
So is this, now that you've done it, I mean, has this always been a dream of yours, and now this is the dream come true to become a really successful novelist?
I didn't have that much ambition. Like I really just wanted to be published. And I remember my ambition being like, I didn't believe anything else would happen, but I thought it'd be really great to like hold a book with my name on it and some artwork and some cool title and a bunch of words inside.
Name
Yeah, exactly.
embossed.
Yeah. So like when I remember the first time I saw the cover of the first Gray Man, I remember feeling like this is the most amazing thing that's ever happened to me. I was babysitting my 3-year-old nephew, and I couldn't get him to understand what I was trying to explain to him as far as what was going on. I was like, the moment was lost on him. He's 18 now, so he'd probably pick up on it. But I just remember going, like they sent me the image. You know, it wasn't physical. It was just like I got an email with the cover, and I just remember just being like, oh my gosh, I've achieved the pinnacle, and that was in 2000, early 2009, I guess. And but I just keep writing and they keep letting me. So
That's the moment, though, isn't it? Funny, your first book, to see the cover.
yeah.
Then you feel like I'm
Right.
an author.
Yeah, exactly. It was the thing that I'd always, and I really, I didn't plan on the Gray Man being a series until they asked me if I wanted to do 2 more. And I was like, about what? And they're like, you're the writer, man. You know. I didn't know really how this worked. And I really, you know, I wanted to be an author, but I didn't think it would ever happen. I remember like, you know, thinking it'd be so cool to be like a Tom Clancy or somebody like that. But I was literally just desperately trying to get a book out with my name on it and didn't look that much further down the road.
But it wasn't easy. Like you weren't a guy that had a ton of contacts in New York or anything. You had to do it kind of the old-fashioned way. Right?
I didn't know any authors, and I didn't know anybody that knew any authors. And there's this, and I know same thing happens to you. Like people reach out to you and they think there's some kind of pixie dust. If you talk to, you know, if you talk to them, you're going to get published. You know, talk to me, you know, I'll get you published or something. So everybody's like, hey, I want to have coffee and, you know, talk about writing. And then when you have in the olden days, when I would have these conversations, it would sort of be like, so how do you become a writer? And I'm like, oh, I was hoping you had a little more. And
a little more specific.
yeah, a little more specific questions. But yeah, and I'm just like, you just sort of have to do it. And every minute you spend talking to an author about it, it's probably not going to get you any closer. When I tell people that I've had 3 books that I wrote that didn't get published, it kind of shows them I don't really have the juice to get them published because I have my own books in it that they've said no to.
So can I interrupt for a minute and say, I remember The Gray Man when it came out in 2009. Yep. Mark and I have been together ever since. And at that point, paperbacks were, in fact, the much more popular, much bigger than they are now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember, because my first book deal, it was just a mass market paperback.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going to my agent and saying, like, is this okay that, you know, it's paperback and it's not a hardcover release? And he said he'd seen a lot of authors where publishers had like sort of spent a lot of money on them and they didn't produce. And he's like, I think it's great to start out in paperback. And I liked his advice, and I think he was totally right. And my first hardcover was Backblast, which was my 5th Gray Man book,
Right.
the first 4.
Wow.
And so I've had multiple people email me and they'll be like, yeah, I've lost all 4 of your first hardbacks. Is there any way you could like hook me up with another one or something like that? And I'm going like, you didn't lose them. I've never seen
No.
it.
But from
And then they get mad at you.
And then they get mad.
Right.
Because they're like, but my collection is hardback.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
I do not read paperback. There's a lot of people that are like, I don't read paperback. And I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'll just read the book to you. I don't know what else I can do.
Audio.
you know,
So then you got hooked up with Tom Clancy. How did that happen? I mean, that must have kind of blown you away.
Yeah, it did. I'd only had 2 books out, my first 2 Gray Man novels, and I had a deal to do some ghostwriting. So I was working on that, and my agent called me. I felt like my editor had been ducking me for a couple of weeks, and because I turned in my 3rd Gray Man book, Ballistic, and the first 2 books, he came back and told me what he thought pretty quickly, but this one I wasn't hearing from him. So I started freaking out. I thought that he was just sitting up there in New York going like, this book is awful. But at the time he was looking for a co-author for Tom Clancy, who was another of his client, of his authors. And so they came to me. My agent called me and asked me if I would be interested, and I was really terrified. Like, I felt like it was, I wanted to go up to the next level, the next rung of the ladder. I didn't want to go up to Tom Clancy level that quickly, but I knew that I couldn't like tell my agent, nah, it's okay, I'm good. And I was just like, somehow you've got to figure it out and make this happen. So it took a few months for me to get the Clancy gig, and I did a tryout on my own. No one asked me to. They were asking if I was interested. They might have been asking other people if they were interested. And I just wanted them to commit one way or the other. And so I said, I will just write 50 pages or 30 pages or something as if it was a Tom Clancy novel, just to show that I know who all the characters are and, their relationships. And so I wrote that. And then I went to Baltimore and met Tom. And then, we did 3 books before he passed away in 2013. And then the family asked me to continue. So I did 4 more.
So is that a weird transition? Because it's kind of unique a little bit that you were working with him and then you had to suddenly work on I'm trying to think of another example of that. Maybe Cussler, Scott.
Yeah, somebody's probably there. Yeah. I felt, it was so funny. I have this imposter syndrome, and I felt like so not ready to be involved with Clancy when it started. But when he passed away, if they'd gone to anybody else to continue the series, I would have been like, you guys are crazy. I'm the right guy for this. Because I'd done 3 books and, had ideas, and I was really in tune with the characters at the time. It's funny, I wrote my last Clancy book in 2016, and I look back on it and I go like, did that really happen? Did I really write 7 Clancy books in 6 years, or co-write, while I was writing Gray Man books most of the same years? And I couldn't do it now. I don't have the output.
The courage. I mean, I found Tom to be super intimidating. Every time I
Did you
met
meet
him,
Yeah.
every time I talk to him, I think he looks at you like, I think he thinks I'm really stupid. And I don't know why I could never shake that. He's a perfectly nice guy. But.
Yeah. I had been warned by like everybody in his orbit that it's like, all right, you're going to go up there and it's going to be like a 45-minute meeting, and it's going to, he can be a little gruff, and, and I was there for 5 hours, and we had lunch and hung out with his wife. It was a really nice experience, but at the same time, it was very intimidating because I'm sitting there in his office, and he's, talking about the engines that the Chinese are using in their 5th generation fighters or whatever, and I'm going like, I don't know this. Do I pretend like I do? I just start making up names and stuff. I mean, he's a uniquely brilliant guy, as evidenced by the fact the internet didn't exist when he wrote his first 6 or 7 novels. I can't imagine.
And then you had to get your mind around that universe too.
Yes.
Which was vast.
Absolutely. And you felt like suddenly you're involved in a phenomenon for the first time in your life. You're like, I was bartending not too long ago. And now I'm like, working on a Tom Clancy novel. It was the first thriller I ever bought in my life was Patriot Games, which is a Tom Clancy novel. When I was 19. Yeah. And that's where I found my love for writing thrillers. I loved to read nonfiction, military and politics and espionage and stuff like that. And I saw Patriot Games somewhere, and it was about the IRA. And I was doing a ton of research on the IRA at the time. I was taking a class called International Terrorism in the Criminal Justice Department in college. And I was like, everybody's been talking about Tom Clancy for like 3 years at this point. Now he's written a book about the IRA. It's like, I'll just pick this up and see if it's any good. And then I realized you can learn a bunch of real things and be incredibly entertained at the same time. And that's the way I've always tried to write. It's like, I don't want to ever get preachy to people, but I want to like do the research to get some real information in there and put it within the narrative of like a crazy, wild, over-the-top story.
Right. And so that actually is a strange segue into the movie, because I know you haven't toured since that, or you haven't had a book come out, right, since the movie?
That's correct, yeah.
So everybody, I'm sure, wants to hear about the movie. And I know Tom, this may be a little known fact, wrote a fairly colorful letter about, I think it was Patriot Games, to the head of the studio, because he had all kinds of issues with it. So, but on the other hand, Vince Flynn would say, movies, you throw your book over a wall and they throw money back to you, and that's the end of the transaction. You just wander off. And so where do you come down on that? Because the movie was great, but it didn't necessarily, I wouldn't say, follow lockstep
I'd
with
say
your book.
it was maybe 60% of the book and 40% Hollywood and Fast and Furious and stuff. I mean, it couldn't be as good. Everybody laughs. I was totally serious. I mean, it couldn't be as gritty as The Gray Man. I mean, it could have, but for the amount of money they put into it and the amount of, people they needed to stream it to make money, decisions were made as far as like the tone of the story. I thought the representation of Ryan Gosling as Gentry was done really well and really deftly.
Yeah, that was great.
And I remember because I talked to the directors before they wrote the first draft of the script, or Joe Russo wrote the first script. And I remember talking to him about some aspects of the character, but then there were other things in there. I was like, I don't even remember talking to them about that. I mean, it's really interesting that, that they picked up on that. But they were writing it to be a franchise from the very beginning. Whereas when I was writing The Gray Man, I was just trying to be a published author. I just wanted to like sit in my cubicle at my day job and go, screw y'all, I've got a book, or so. I don't know what I wanted to do. Something along those lines. That was my ambition. So I wasn't planning out books 2 and books 3. I actually had a conversation with Tom Clancy, and I asked him if he, because the Clancy books aren't completely chronological. And I asked him, I was like, did you plan out the Jack Ryan thing? And I completely believe him. He said, yeah, absolutely. I did. This was going to happen. This was going to happen. Then I was going to go back and show, this.
Do you mean throughout his whole series? He planned
Well,
ahead,
at least in the early part of the series. Yeah,
his
at
books
least
were the size of a series.
Yeah, at least the first 4 or 5 books.
Really?
He went into depth about how he had this plan for this character's development or whatever, and I didn't have any of that. So, in the screenplay, they were planning on making it a franchise. So they introduced characters that don't come along till book 5 or book 2 of the series. Mm-hmm. But they wanted to introduce them because they're building like a longer arc, which I don't even know what that arc is. I don't know where it will intersect and where it will divide. I know which book they're doing for this. They're doing a sequel to The Gray Man, and I don't think I never asked permission to say which book it is, but the screenwriter told me which one that they're working on adapting. I don't know when it'll come out, but it is. But it is based on one of the books in the series, so that's good. Overall, I'm like happy with the film because I see it as a commercial for my work, and I was glad that if they'd gotten Gentry really wrong, I would have been like incredibly like upset with the whole thing, and they didn't. I thought they really got him. Also, the relationship between the little girl and Gentry was really, really well done. It could have easily been like really overbaked and schmaltzy or over the top, and it would have changed who that character Gentry was to me. And so I'm glad they didn't do that. I will say in the book, the little girl, Claire Fitzroy, has some agency in what happens to her. She actually is clever and helps save herself. Whereas in the movie, she's just sort of like a pawn to be rescued by the hero type of thing. So that was a difference to where I'm like, maybe it would have taken more pages in the screenplay to flesh out, but they're just 2 different mediums, and you have to look at them like that, and people email me and they're like, why did you let them do this? Why did you let them do that? And it's like, Stephen King, the bag of money over the wall. You just, like I optioned this in Hollywood the first time before the book even came out, and it was a paperback, and it was not a lot of money, and I wasn't just doing it for I wasn't doing it for the money at all, which sounds like a lie until I tell you the other, reason. I was doing it so I could tell people that it had been optioned in Hollywood and use that as a way to perk people up when I'm like, hey, I'm another dude with a little paperback, I wanted to be like, yeah, this has been optioned by, at first it was New Regency and then it was Sony. And that was like the best part of the whole deal was I was like, yeah, Hollywood's doing something with this, and I didn't think there was any chance whatsoever.
It's that little built-in credibility.
Exactly,
that,
it was a little bit of credibility when you need it. Like when your first book comes out and you're signing 3 books for 3 people in a 2-hour signing at a library somewhere, and to have that fact that the option was out there was good for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, do I understand there's also maybe a spinoff?
Yes, and I know nothing about it, and that's not me being cagey. I literally know nothing about
So
it.
you don't even know which character it
I don't
is?
know which character it is. I know who's writing it. It's a guy named Rhett Reese, who was one of the writers on Deadpool. They're writing a spin-off, I believe, for television of something from the Gray Man series. So, we can all watch it together, whatever it's. I really don't know anything about it, and that may seem improbable, but I really, really don't.
No, they don't tell you.
Even
necessarily,
I was at the premiere last summer, and which was really cool. We got to meet some of the actors, not all of them, even though they were all in the same room. Just they were gone by the time we got to. But Regé Jean Page, who is one of the actors, he plays Denny Carmichael in it. I was talking to him, and we were just chatting, and I was like, "Gosh, I hope they do another." And he kind of cocked his head, and he looked at me, and he's like, "You don't know?" And I was like, "No, what?" And he goes, "Something's cooking." He just goes, "Something's cooking." And it's like, he was like, "Well, I guess if they haven't told this idiot, I guess I don't want to be the one." There's probably a reason for that. He just goes, "Something's cooking." And then it was like the film came out on the 22nd of July, and the 26th of July, they announced there's going to be a sequel. So I think they already knew before.
No respect.
No
For
respect.
respect.
Yeah.
Nobody cares about an author or a screenwriter. Yeah.
Yeah.
So with you, we talked about a little bit how Tom planned out series, but I mean, you've got a pretty complex universe going now too.
Yes.
And you wrote Sierra 6, which gave us some backstory. Had you always kind of planned on doing that? Because that's a little dangerous, because you can kind of do violence to your universe if you get things wrong. Yes,
getting things wrong. As I guess as I get older or deeper into this, I'm just kind of going to let that happen here and there. It's just really hard, and people just angrily will email you and be like, "Well, this happened in February, and why is it not snowing?" or whatever. And you get those emails. And early in my career, I was just obsessed with like proving people wrong, or like covering my butt in my books, and I would put details in the books explaining why the muzzle velocity of this gun had been altered by 5 feet a second or something like that. But it's not good writing. And my editor, Tom, would be like, "Yeah, you're going a little long here." And I realized it was just because it's like, I know I'm going to get that email from that, 500 gun guys going like, "Well, wait a second. He's using steel case ammo or whatever, So as you get 12 books in, and these books average 150 something thousand words each. So, we're pushing 2 million words in the Gray Man universe, I guess. My math is, no one said there'd be math tonight. You're going to get some stuff wrong, especially with like the canon. And like one of my early examples, apologies to anybody that's come see me talk before, because I feel like I bring this up all the time, because it's like a quick shorthand of like how you screw stuff up. In the first Gray Man book, I say that he's from outside of Tallahassee. And I think in the third Gray Man book, I just or fourth or something, I misremembered that. I didn't go back to look. You're writing 2 books a year. You're just trying to crank it out, and you're like, somebody will catch it. But I said he lived outside of Jacksonville. So I did that, and the book came out, and then somebody was like, "Hey, you said he lived outside of Tallahassee." So I looked for a town on the highway between Tallahassee and Jacksonville, and I wanted it to be a town that had a cool name. And so it's actually a lot closer to Jacksonville than Tallahassee. Is a town called Glen St. Mary, and I put that in there, and I went into detail and backblast about where he was, and I just Google Street viewed it. I just basically walked that whole place. And so I've gotten emails from like that county newspaper going like, "What is your connection with Glen St. Mary?" And there's number 12. Yeah, exactly. And people are like, "Oh wow, I have a house on Claude Allen Road. When were you here?" And I do email these people back, and I'm always like, "Yeah, it's not the story you want to hear, but." I just Google Maps you out of necessity. But you do make mistakes in the series. And also, I don't age my character, which, right. I mean, you're going through the same thing. And some people do, like Daniel Silva brilliantly has aged Gabriel Alon. And I think Stephen Hunter as well, right?
Yes, and Daniel Silva's actually moved Gabriel out of the spy. He's back to being an art restorer in Venice in his last book.
Right. But I mean, if you had court gentry aging in real time, I think in the first book I said he was born in 1972 or something like that. So he'd be like in his 50s now, and it's just he'd be okay. Yeah. It sounds like somebody that. There you go. Yeah. So it's kind of hard having him like dive off of a scaffold and like land in a parkour roll, and because I'm 55, so I was like, yeah, I'm saying like, yeah, I couldn't have done that 20 years ago, but I really couldn't do it now. So
how do you handle younger characters though? Because you've got maybe a kid, and then that kid, do you age that kid, and then eventually they're older than Court?
That hasn't.
I'm asking this for myself.
Yeah. No. So I don't. That's a good question. So I don't have any like recurring children characters. It's usually the same like half dozen characters in each book or in different books. But in the first Gray Man book, there's this character that was in the movie, Claire Fitzroy, and I've had so many people going like, "Are you going to do a spinoff of Claire Fitzroy?" And I'm like, she's like a 7th grader that's like doing something geopolitical. It's a great idea. I just don't know that I'm going to spend 6 months doing it.
She's older now, right?
Yeah, she'd be older now. She'd probably be like 7th.
All right, so here's you told me last week I could ask you anything, so this is where you pay for it.
All right.
I
was young and I needed the money.
Yes. Oh, that's always the answer.
Yeah.
What are you doing that the rest of us aren't? What makes The Gray Man a unique series? And to be clear, I already have my answer, so I just want to see what you're going to say.
I don't know that I'm doing something that other people aren't doing. I think I have a decent combination of a protagonist who's got toughness, mental toughness, and he also has empathy for others, and he also has a lot of vulnerabilities. And I think people can relate to that, putting that together. And I don't really know what else it is. I think, my character's got a good sardonic sense of humor because I have a half a year to think up those lines, and I don't have to do it off the cuff. So I don't know. I think that makes him I wish I knew. I'm
going to tell you.
Okay, good. Every time I second guess like something I'm writing, I tell myself, I'm like, you've made it this far, just do what you think is right. Because I will say like, well, what do people think this? I'm an insecure writer overall, like and my wife who's back there can tell you, like every July, I just think the book that I've been working on for 6 months is just horrible. And you turn in the first draft and then you get a second draft and then you start to fix all the little, where the bodies are buried and you start fixing them. And then finally I start to like it. But I don't really have a good answer. I need an answer.
The wives and the husbands and wives of writers just take a terrible beating.
Yeah.
It's that pulling your hair out.
It's really the only person you can tell.
Nobody's ever going to want to read this crap.
I can't call my editor and go like, I'm really terrible, because he's not going to.
Best not.
Yeah.
No, for me, what I love about your series is your willingness to take risks. I mean, you wrote a book in the first person. You interlaced with Sierra 6 two like full-size novels together, and which is something you hadn't done in the past.
Yeah.
Do you do that because you're like, geez, I need a new challenge, or do you do it because you think that's the best way to tell my story?
I think it's the best way to tell the story, but I'm sort of obsessed with not covering, like doing something twice. And we've all, I'm a reader first and foremost, and we've all read series of books where you go, oh, this guy's just started phoning it in at this point in their career. And now that I'm here, I'm far enough in my career, I'm like, they're not phoning it in. It's just impossible to come up with a different way that somebody follows another guy down the street. It's like, it may seem repetitive, but it's like, you come up with another way to do it, And I have this joke that like, at some point I'm going to be writing a knife fight in a hot tub, and I'm going to be like, oh my God, this is my third knife fight in a hot tub. It's like sooner or later, like every permutation will be out. So I feel like that's why my stories are different.
Oh, I want to ask a question.
I thought
Actually, I wanted to offer a comment.
wrap it up.
Because no.
She wants to ask you a question.
No, but I was thinking, because in the beginning, just so for fun, we could talk about this book for just a moment. Burner, I know you were. Burner has a really interesting sequence in the opening where Kurt is blowing up things.
Yeah.
But he has a kind of a moral code that
Yeah.
I find really interesting. And, it really came into play in the opening parts here of Burner. So
Yeah.
I think that makes him intriguing.
Yeah, he has this moral compass that might not be like everybody else's, but I think he stays true to it. And in one of my books, Gunmetal Gray, at the end, I remember when I was writing it, I was going like, all right, he wants to let this guy that he rescued go back to Taiwan where he wants to go, but the CIA wants to debrief him because he was a Chinese guy or whatever. Not a Chinese guy. He was a Chinese intelligence officer. And I thought, well, the fans are going to get mad if Court goes against the CIA just to give this kid the thing that he wants, which is just to be away from all of this. And I was like, but I think it's right for the character, the gray man, the Court Gentry character. That's what he would do. So I need to stay true to that. So I like the shifting moral compass. In the beginning of Burner, this book, Court is not affiliated with the CIA. He's totally on his own. So he's taken a job from a shady Ukrainian oligarch to blow up the mega yachts of shady Russian oligarchs, which is kind of a shady oligarch is sort of misplaced. But so he's going around the world and destroying these yachts, like scuba diving under them, putting limpet mines on them and blowing them up. And he's basically doing that because of what's happening, the war in Ukraine, and he has no way to get into Russia and put a knife in the ribs of a general to make a difference in the war. So it's almost he's just sort of passive aggressively blowing up the rich Russian stuff, and then the CIA tracks him down and they send him on a mission. But yeah, he's doing the only thing he can think to do at that point as a freelancer to affect things, I guess.
What's the dedication for your book?
Oh, the dedication for the book, and it's also how I'm signing the book. So I will sign my books any way you want me to sign them, but if you just don't care, I will write Slava Ukraini, which just means glory to Ukraine. It's just I'm very pro-Ukraine and very anti-Russian, and you would think there wouldn't be that many pro-Russians these days, but they're out there. So it
Might even be here.
Sure, they might be here.
So this brings me to an interesting point of you wrote about Ukraine, which is kind of dangerous.
Yeah.
So obviously it worked, but did that come into your thinking at all? That what happens if the war is over or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, last spring and summer, that's all I thought about was I'm really, I have to kind of prognosticate where things are, where things will be next February. And I got most of it right, and the stuff that I was too cynical about, as far as support in the West, which has been better than I think any of us could have expected, and pleasantly so. There, you still, even with that in the real world, you still see the fissures, and you still see the people saying, we need to end this war. And so the plot of this book involves a potential peace treaty, which is very cynical, and it protects Russian interests at the expense of Ukrainian territory and Ukrainian lives. And I could see something like that happening. Maybe not now. We've had some really good news recently as far as the French giving the Leclerc tanks and America giving the Abrams tanks, which doesn't really make as much sense because I think they're a little bit more complicated. And then the Challenger tanks from the UK and the Leopard 2s from Germany. So that's going to benefit Ukraine, and that's really good news. But at the same time, two things that happen in Burner that have happened is there are voices out there in the U.S. government and other governments and Germany and in political punditry that are supporting Russia or just against any sort of conflict. I mean, any sort of conflict against Ukraine. And so that is happening. And then the other thing that's happening is this book involves people in the West who are taking bribes from the Russians to influence things in their scope. And just like 3 weeks ago, the former head of counterintelligence in the New York office of the FBI was arrested for taking money from Oleg Deripaska, who's a oligarch supporter of Putin. And the International Criminal Court, they caught a Russian GRU officer who'd gotten a job as an intern there, pretending to be a Brazilian. And what else? Oh, this guy in Germany who's a member of their BND, the German Foreign Intelligence, was arrested for spying for Russia just in the last couple months. So my book has a lot of people in the West that are actually on the take from Russia, and all that's kind of blowing up kind of right now. But yeah, it was really scary when I was writing the book, because it's like, I had to predict that, okay, Russia will have a lot of territory in the east, and but they won't have Kiev, and the war will still be ongoing, yada yada.
But the focus is more on their asymmetrical.
Absolutely, yeah. So not one page of this book takes place in Ukraine. There's no tanks or anything in the story. It's an espionage novel, but it over the backdrop of the war in Ukraine.
Right. And then also, I think the big thing in this book is the relationships between Zoya and Court.
Yeah.
And is that something you think you're going to pursue? It's really different to have the lone wolf and the she's an imperfect person too.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So there's a lot of will they or won't they with Court and Zoya Zakharova, who's his on again, off again, depending on what book I'm working on and where I need the plot to go, love interest. She's in this story, and she's in a very, very dark place emotionally, not as, if you've read any of the other books, not as you've seen Zoya before. Like when she comes into this book in a very kind of desperate situation because of a lot of, things that are happening to her, and her mental state isn't that healthy. And I just like leaning into psychology and relationships and things like that. I mean, these are action novels. There's like the hero like rolls his Porsche into a tree. Like into the top of a tree. So there's wacky action and all that sort of stuff. But at the same time, I really wanted to lean into the emotions of the war. So there's a character named Alex Bileski, who's a Ukrainian who's lost his family, and he's at the heart of this story. And like his emotions are very visceral in the story because of what he's been through. There's a Russian guy named Igor Krupkin. Yeah. You forget the names. I'm 40,000 words into the next book, and I was like, I'm not going to remember all these names. And he has very personal reasons for why he's trying to stop the Kremlin. And Court and Zoya have very personal reasons for why they're doing what they do. And I just think it makes better fiction if you have like these like real personal stakes of characters that you care about. And it's less important than how many drones are shooting how many missiles. It's the you only care about these stories if the characters are important to you.
Yeah, all books are about people, right? They're not about tanks.
Right. Because all books are read by people. If a book was about butterflies, it would still be about people because they're read by people.
Yeah, exactly. So let me ask you, I don't know, are we doing okay on time?
We're doing okay. But before we're done, we need to talk to you about your book for a few minutes too.
Well, let me ask one question here. Sure. This is sort of a finishing question. So what's next? I mean, you've got so many projects going on. Can you list them all for us?
I'm doing book 13 in the Gray Man series. It'll be out next February. Book 14 will be out February 25. I'm doing the second book in the Armored series. I'm doing the second book in the Red Metal series. That's been delayed. I don't know how much longer it's going to be delayed. When the war kicked off, my co-author, Rip Rawlings, who was an active duty Marine lieutenant colonel when Red Metal came out, he's since retired. And then the war kicked off, and he and his wife, who was a Navy combat surgeon, now she's an endocrinologist, or she does surgery on the endocrine system. I don't know how to pronounce that. Yeah, but endocrinologist, I think, is a doctor. Yeah, anyway, she'll correct me. I love those people. Anyway, they went over to Poland, and then Rip went into Ukraine, like right when the war started, at the absolute most diciest in the west of Ukraine. and he started a foundation to support a battalion of foreign fighters over there, a task force there, and I've been supporting it, and other people have been supporting it, and he's getting them everything from uniforms to optics to trucks to trailers to move equipment, and he's been in and out of Ukraine, spending a good bit of time in Poland, and I think he's in the U.S. now. But this has become his focus, and so Red Metal, me and our agent and our editor and everybody agrees, is like, yeah, we'll do Red Metal when we can do Red Metal. Right now, he's impacting things over there, which is awesome. So I will do that book. I'm not exactly sure when it is, and then I have other things that I want to do, future wise. But I'll probably keep doing one Gray Man book a year, at least for the foreseeable future, if they let
So
me.
you're going to slow down a little bit?
I need to dial it back. It's harder. You spend the same amount of hours working, and you get fewer words than you used to, because my joke is like, this is my 23rd book. When I think up something cool, I can't think of the first cool thing. I have to think of the 24th cool thing that, before I can write it, because I've already used those first 23, things. Let's say somebody's going to take a jet to Europe. It's like, how do you write that scene if you've done that 16 times? It's like,
Right.
you have to do it a little different or whatever. So it makes you go slower. So I will slow down.
And now with so many books in the series, you almost have to just think up a new way to describe the character, because you always have to think about that person that's never read one of
Right.
your books,
Yeah.
and not bore to tears the person that's read every single one.
Absolutely. So every book is standalone. You don't have to read them in any order. So there's a point on page, it probably averages at like page 40 or something, where it basically says who's who and what's what. And I do it pretty economically, different ways each time, but in just a few paragraphs, you understand that the hero's a former CIA officer, and the agency had been after him for a while, and now he has kind of this detente with certain people in the CIA, and does some contract work sometimes. So yeah, you do have to like reestablish that with every book for the people that haven't read the others.
Yeah.
There's an interesting question. Since Sierra 6 is the one that has Kurt's backstory, it would be different if you read it first, if you'd never read a Kurt entry, than if you come to it having read Kurt entry.
Yeah, I guess so. Like because if you read Sierra 6 first, you would learn about him joining this paramilitary unit. And then if you read On Target, which was the second Gray Man book, that introduces the fact that he had done that in the past, and you would already know about it. I don't think it would really ruin the story or anything like that. But yeah, you're right. It would get a little jumbled in your head. So if you do have all 12 books, don't just like throw them up in the air and then just close your eyes and grab one. If you do have all 12 books, you can start with book 1 and go forward. But I always say, because I've read a bunch of series in my life too. It's like people don't always remember, every detail. They remember more details than I want them to when I get something wrong.
Right. But you're also really great at research. Since I do the store Instagram, I see Mark's posting and Allison's posting on Instagram, and you've gone to a lot of trouble to travel to, scenes.
Yeah.
So you're not making all of it up. You're really there getting the feeling for it.
Yeah, I've always liked location research. This book was like a book when you tell people what location research you did, they're like, yeah, to write a book. Because we went to the Caribbean island of St. Lucia, and we went to Milan and Zurich and Geneva. So I've had other books where I've been in Algeria or El Salvador or whatever, but this one was more, I guess, a little higher end than some of my book tours.
I loved your scenes in Milan. I thought they were terrific.
Thank you.
I really did. So, Vince, let's talk about you for just a minute. Vince. Fell right into that, didn't I?
And Mitch. I definitely
Okay, well, there's identification. So, since you've asked Mark what it
Flattering.
was like to take up with Tom Clancy, what was it like for you? Because you were the author of quite a few books before Vince Flynn sadly died. How did you feel about Mitch Rapp, and how did that come to you?
Yeah, kind of a call out of the blue. I had known, actually, my wife had called me and said, "Oh, Vince Flynn died," and I realized he was sick, but I didn't know that he was that ill. And I remember kind of selfishly thinking, geez, at the end of The Survivor, it's like the book didn't really finish, and Mitch is just hanging there. I hope they find somebody good to at least write one more and, have him die in a horrible explosion or retire in something for closure. And yeah, I got a call a few weeks later asking if I wanted to potentially do that. So I wasn't sure, honestly. I had written some books for Robert Ludlum, the Ludlum estate. And so I said, well, I'm going to reread The Survivor again and see if I can think of something to do with it. And I don't know, I sent him a thing saying, yeah, here's an idea of where I go with it, but I probably won't really do this because once it gets on the page, it'll probably look stupid and I'll change my mind 10 times. And I thought, well, I'm never going to get that job. And they said, sure.
What a salesman.
Yeah, it was terrible. I honestly wasn't sure. Yeah, so it would, and they said, sure, that'd be fine. So off I went.
Vince had a fairly established universe and characters, so you had to go back, I'm assuming, and do a fair amount of, rereading or whatever it might be to get yourself immersed in it.
Yeah, because I've read those books like everybody, right, as a fan, like over, 15 years, not necessarily in order. So I had to go back and read them all in order and took like 140 pages of notes and everything. Because, like you say, I mean, if you get a detail wrong, particularly, if you're taking over, it's not great.
Yeah.
It comes off less as stupid and more as almost disrespectful.
Right.
So I did not want to make a mistake. So I did all that research, and then, Vince had not been kind to me. He'd arced this story, so it never didn't finish, but he killed the bad guy. So it was really a very difficult thing to continue, and I kind of figured out how I thought he might have done it. And I had assumed, because I'm a big outliner, probably the biggest outliner in the world. I write, for a 100,000 page book, I'll write a 35,000 word outline, which nobody else does. Nobody in their right mind does. But I assumed he'd write some kind of outline, and he had written 3 pages of the book. So I would never write 3 pages of the book without a total idea of where it was going to go, everything, to have all the research done. And so I said, okay, I'll take it on.
Where is it?
Where is it? Yeah, he's like, have Lisa, his wife, send me the box. And they're like, what box? All the box of everything. Yeah. It's 3 pages. It was 3 pages in a box. And so you should ask questions before you take a job. Ask lots of questions. But you're not a big outline, like you don't write huge outlines either.
No, I don't. For the book I'm writing now is probably the most in-depth one I've done, because last year with this
More
book,
than Sierra 6.
Yeah, I did not map that one out
really?
much beforehand. And Burner, I didn't map it out much beforehand, and ended up changing a lot of things as I got deeper into it. So I was like, all right, I need to be more organized. So I would like to be, like, I have fantasies of like having this perfect outline where each chapter is, and it's just paint by numbers, and nothing remotely close to that's ever happened. It's always on the day and freaking out and writing something and going, well, that doesn't make sense for something that happens later in the story, or writing the book way out of sequence. I'll write the parts of the last act, before I write the opening scene sometimes. And I wish my brain worked more efficiently, but it just is this big chaos.
So you have the whole thing where it court's upside down in the tree in the car, and you're like, oh shoot, I don't know how he's going to get out of that.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, in some way that he hasn't done before.
Yeah, you got to go for a long run or take a long shower or something.
Yeah, I take my dogs to the park, or what I try and do is write somewhere else in the book, just move to another place, and then you're like, oh, something is great will come into my head, and sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. You just do the best.
There's that subconscious, though, that is always
working on it. Yeah, absolutely.
You don't really realize it, and all of a sudden you
I've come
wake
up with answers to things, while working on other parts or while not writing or without even like consciously thinking about it. It just sort of like the best part, and maybe it's the same for you, the best part of the entire writing process is when 2 non-connected parts of the story suddenly make sense together. You're like, well, but if I said that they both work for the same Swiss bank, then that would connect these 2 things, or whatever, that's that moment where you're like, oh my gosh, this book is going to look like it makes sense to other people, and it's like, to me, I'm still lost, but
So writing is not a linear process. We're working out. So before we ask questions, what are you working on? There's going to be another Mitch Rapp coming at us when?
Code Red on September 12th. That will be released.
Or possibly here on
Or
September
possibly
9th.
Years, if you throw your influence around, it's going to be a few days earlier than that.
I'm doing that because I'm going on a cruise to the Great Lakes on September 10th. So I have to figure out a way to make this work out. Anyway, it's always nice to know that your favorite authors have a new book coming, right? So you don't have to panic. How about questions from the audience? Mark, you want to take over? And
Pick.
Go ahead.
So, what was the thought process in the shift to the first person in 1 Minute Out? I just got into your series about the last 3 months.
Okay, great.
Powered through it and just finished that.
Uh-huh.
A little backstory: my daughter had spent a year and a half in Croatia,
Mm.
so reading that book was a bit troublesome for me. With
Yeah.
my daughters,
Yeah,
it's very hard to get through, but
Sure.
absolutely fantastic on the first person shift. And so I'm curious as to
Thank you.
how did that storyline come out? Because that's pretty bold.
Two things were going on there. One is I'd kind of always wanted to write in the first person. The first Gray Man book I ever wrote was called Goon Squad. That never got published, but it introduced the Gray Man character. And I got it in front of an agent who's still my agent to this day. He wasn't my agent then because I didn't have anything that he could sell. But he said, I like this character, the Gray Man, but I don't love this story, and I don't think you should do first person. I think it'll seem stronger in third person. So I was 1 Minute Out was 9 books in or 10 books in, and nine books in. And I kind of wanted to do first person, and also this seemed like the right book. That seemed like the right book to do it in because there's large swaths of 1 Minute Out where he's got no one to play off of, and I really like no other characters with him. He's by himself. And I think Court is at his best in dialogue with other people and the back and forth that way. So I was like, all right, maybe he'll just be sort of like having an internal monologue and people will follow that along. And honestly, it's the only Gray Man book that hit #1 on the Times list. It has like a 95% 4 or 5 stars on Amazon, but I've got more negatives from that than any of my other books. And it was just because it was different, they didn't like it. And then a lot of people be like, I hate first person. I'm like, you hate Catcher in the Rye? You hate Moby Dick? You're sitting there thinking of like different first person stories. And it's like, I don't know that you could just say I hate
I
first
got
person.
used to you doing it the other way.
Yeah, it was just
That
different. It was just different. And I thought it would take a few beats for people to follow along. And honestly, most people did. And I might do it again at some point. I don't know if I will or not. It wasn't to like exercise a muscle or to like do something cool. I just thought it would work right for that character, and I always thought that it would sound cool to be in his head a little bit. Yes, sir.
How much of it do you make up in your head just thinking that it sounds good versus seeing if it would actually be feasible, like somehow checking?
Yeah, I make it up in my head, but I make it up based on some sort of research usually. Not always. Sometimes it's just crazy stuff, but like I took a stunt driving class and worked that into Mission Critical, and I've done scuba diving and worked that into an action sequence, here and there, things along that line. And I like to do location research. I've literally like climbed up a wall and I'm like, I can't get over this wall, but could you, if you got here, is there light that would show on that or not? But then at a certain point, you just want to have the reader emote over the story, and it doesn't matter if it's right or not. There was a real place that I used in my book Agent in Place, where this woman is, they're trying to capture this woman who is the mistress of the president of Syria, and she's in Paris. And I went to the real place and I went all around and there was no balcony. And I was like, well, I kind of need a balcony. So I put a balcony on there and I don't care. If people want to email me and say there's no balcony, I'm just like, okay.
Just say the story needed it.
Yeah, the story needed it. So I think that's what I'm trying to say is like, I definitely do research and I do stuff with firearms and I've done all these different things, but it's all based on something. But I am sitting there on a couch with my laptop in my lap when I think it up. I'm not out there like, storyboarding it or, like reenacting it or anything like that. Oh, thank you so much for saying that. I appreciate it. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, go ahead. All right, I'll answer that question first. Or was that the two questions? That's one. Okay, good. I don't remember exactly how I came up with the name Court Gentry, although his name at first was different. It was Chris Travers, who is now another character in the book. So I really don't remember, but it wasn't anything inspired. I was just bouncing different names around, and I liked the sound of it or something. But at one point, he was Chris Travers, and I kind of like Chris Travers more than I like Court Gentry, but name-wise. Is it hard to come up with names? It's really hard when you have so many books. I use all these dumb little ways to find names. Like I literally will look up the national volleyball team in Kazakhstan if I need a Kazakh person, and I'll use a first name from this person and a last name from this person. And I usually do volleyball because nobody knows volleyball players. It's not like you're going to be like Shaquille O'Neal walked into. It's going to be something like a little more obscure, but I do that a lot, and I think I've plumbed the name of every French volleyball player in one book or another. So I'll do other versions of that, but it does get tough, and you don't want to repeat names. I had a character in this book named Lacey, and then in the book I'm writing now, there was a character name that I wrote several chapters, and I can't remember what it was, but it was very close to Lacey. And then I was like, wait, that's a character in the series now. I can't use that. So anyway. Yeah. Oh yeah, no, I definitely care. No, I think it's really great, and I just never thought it was going to happen. So when it happened, that's still that thing where you're like, you just never know. So I'm happy with the movie. My wife and I went to the premiere, and we had a really good time, and that's all it is to me. Like it doesn't really affect my life. I mean, yes, it's gotten me like more readers and 250 million hours streamed the first 28 days. I don't have 250 million readers, but I don't know how that translates. So it's been really good. But like, just when you're writing, you know how it is. It's like you're thinking about next year's book. Right now, I'm thinking about next year's book. I'm panicking about next year's book. So even when the film came out, I was in a hotel in West Hollywood till 3:00 that afternoon in the lobby working on Burner, and so you always have to look down the road, especially, and even when there's all this attention on you for this book, you have to like shake it off and go, okay, but next year's book is going to be a train wreck if I don't work hard on it. So, yes, sir.
So it seems to be kind of a unique thing you're doing with multiple universes going at once. I don't sense that Isles is kind of working for different kind of plot lines. As you kind of work and maintain all these different ones, are you seeing any influences between the two? Like you talked about, Red Metal stopping. You're not going to release part 2.
Yeah.
But Red Metal, in some ways, sounds like there's some similarities to what's happening in Burn, at least in terms of location and politics. How are you seeing those influences? Because you're the same person.
Yeah.
Writing about each one, and you're not trying to replicate there, but there's got to be some sort of influence happening as you're playing.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the main influence would be like some of the research kind of like dovetails between one project and another. But I look at Red Metal as a military thriller that Rip, my co-author, and I like plotted out and planned about a Russian attack into Poland and Germany, and then another Russian attack into the Horn of Africa. And so Burner is about Russian foreign intelligence money laundering through a bank in Switzerland to influence, to bribe people in the West. So they both have a Russian military, thing at their core, but they feel very, very different. There's not that many, and this, there's not that many like peer opponents in the world. So if you've written a book about North Korea in the Clancy world, I'll still write one in the Gray Man world or in the Josh Duffy world or something like that. You definitely don't want to cover the same ground. But other than the research kind of carrying over, like I've been to Beijing, and that worked its way into Gunmetal Gray, which was a Gray Man book. But I went to Beijing for Threat Vector, which was my second Tom Clancy novel. and I just used the same, kind of same research, same pictures. I didn't use the same locations or anything like that. There was other stuff that happened, but it is an interesting question, because you really don't, when you're working on different worlds, you want them to be very different and distinct. And I never really had a problem when I wrote the Clancy stuff, confusing Jack Ryan and Court Gentry. Like, they just felt like two different worlds when I worked on them. So that's all.
Do you have maybe one more question?
Okay.
Two more.
Yes, ma'am.
Having grown up as an Army brat and then having worked with the have you had an experience that has stuck out for you, maybe one or two with the military? I love how you write, and I think it's in your heart. I'm just curious how that happened.
Thanks. Well, if you look to your left, did he set you up for this? Oh, okay. Yeah. So this is Jack Stewart, who is also an author, and he was a Navy Reserve pilot a year and a half ago, and I got to fly in the back seat of one of his F-18s, one of his many F-18s. I don't know if that's a good explanation, but yeah, I mean, that for the longest time, I had the hardest time saying like what the coolest thing I got to do research-wise, and it was most definitely it was that hour and a half or so that we were flying, and it was an hour and 20 minutes of that were really great. And there was about 10 minutes where I did not want to be on that airplane, but it was right in the middle. I shook it off. Nothing bad happened. And then everything went great. I mean, that was simply the coolest thing. I was on a destroyer once, and it wasn't the equipment. It was like meeting the people, like literally like a 20-year-old female Navy person that has this like job that's like tougher than anything I've ever done in my entire life. It's like these young people are given like this incredible responsibility and very little thanks for it. And it was just really impactful. And that made its way into everything I've written since then, that these people are out there and they don't even seem real if you haven't been around them. So, but getting to meet people like that.
My question is back to the Gray Man movie. As far as like the second one,
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like just from everybody that once you sign the book, book's over, you don't have much say.
Right.
Are you gonna have any? I mean, will they come to you on the second one?
They don't have to. Contractually, they don't have to. I met Steve McFeely, who's writing the second one. He's written some of the Marvel films and was co-author or co-screenwriter for Gray Man. And I've met him and we've talked, but I don't know that they'll ever reach out to me or anything. It's the cinematic version of it is theirs, and the books are mine, and they're always going to be the same. People have asked me, they're like, "Are you going to change stuff in the book because of the movie?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about? Why would I do that?" It's like they're just two different worlds, and it would just be very strange to turn one into the other. So I don't know. They might reach out to me. I mean, the Russos have reached out to me a few times over the years, asking me a question or something like that. So that might happen with book 2 or Steve McFeely.
I thought they did a very good job.
Yeah. I mean, I really feel like he got the sensibility of it really well, and didn't do too much, which I was worried about. I'd read the script, so I knew what was in there, but like to actually see him do it, I was really impressed.
Of course, you realize the vulnerability is that only Ryan Gosling can be in a Gray Man movie now, which is, why that's why the Lincoln Lawyer didn't have another movie, and they have a different guy on television. So there's a plus and a minus about a big star in your film. You want to hand me that book right there? So we've come to the moment when let's first of all thank our authors for coming this evening.
Thank you guys for coming, really.
And in order to thank you, I'm going to give away an advanced reading copy of a book. And Alma Katsu, right on point here, this is her second book in her Red series. Alma actually is a CIA or was a CIA officer. And she's taking on Russia again with Lindsay Duncan. And it's a really interesting story because Lindsay is sent to London to try to befriend and turn the wife of a Russian oligarch, because London is where they cluster. I mean, there's really serious Russian money in London. And in the process, we get to see the wife trying to figure out what her, because she's British, married to a Russian oligarch, what her story will be. It's a really interesting book, and I like the first one a lot. Alma will be here on March 12th, Sunday. So anyway, Mark, would you pick a number between 1 and 36, and that lucky person will get this advanced reading copy?
26.
Aha, it's you. Oh, the person who asked the interesting question. One of many, I might add. So you want to come get your book? And you could bring it back and meet Alma. You are entirely welcome. I love giving away my advanced reading copies. I never feel good about just throwing them out. So it's always good to do it this way. So what we're going to do, first of all, thank you, virtual audience, for joining us. If you guys would stand up and fold up your chairs and lean them against the wall. And then if you could line up by number, we'll leave Mark and